Hello, and welcome back to the Sleepy Darwin. Whether you're here to let go of the day's weight, to find some gentle curiosity before sleep, or to simply float among impossible thoughts, you've found the perfect place to land. Tonight, we're embarking on a thought experiment that begins with a single, wild question. What if the force that keeps your feet on the ground, your coffee in your cup, and the planets in their dance around the sun simply stopped? What if gravity, that invisible hand that shapes everything from falling leaves to spinning galaxies, decided to take a break? It's a scenario that sounds like science fiction, but the physics behind it tells a story both beautiful and terrifying, of floating oceans and wandering moons, of a universe suddenly untethered from its most fundamental rule. Before we begin our weightless journey, if you enjoy these sleepy explorations into the impossible, a like and subscribe help keep this little corner of physics floating peacefully through the algorithm. And I'd love to know in the comments where you're listening from. Are you drifting off in a bustling city, or settling in somewhere quiet where gravity still holds everything exactly where it should be? I hope this video isn't too fascinating to keep you awake, but if it is, at least you'll float off to sleep with some mind-bending physics. So take a deep breath, let yourself feel wonderfully heavy for just a moment longer, and let's imagine a universe where up and down lose all meaning. Let's begin with an apple. Not the forbidden fruit of knowledge, but something far more ordinary, a simple apple that happened to fall near a man named Newton 3 centuries ago. Whether this moment truly happened as the story goes hardly matters. What matters is the question it represents. Why do things fall down instead of sideways, or up, or in graceful spirals toward the horizon? Newton gave us our first real answer. Gravity, he said, is a force in visible threads connecting every piece of matter in the universe to every other piece. The Earth pulls on you with the same fundamental attraction that you, impossibly small as you are, pull back on the Earth. It's a cosmic tug-of-war where the more massive player always wins, yet both participants feel the pull. When you drop that apple, it accelerates toward the ground at precisely 9.8 meters per second squared. Not because the Earth is particularly fond of apples, but because this is simply what matter does to other matter across the void. For more than 200 years, this explanation felt complete. Gravity was a force, period. It reached across space instantly, connecting the sun to distant Pluto with invisible ropes of attraction. It was clean, mathematical, satisfying in the way that good physics should be. But then came Einstein, and with him, a revelation so strange that even today it feels more like poetry than science. Einstein whispered a different story entirely. Gravity, he suggested, isn't a force at all. It's not invisible threads or mystical attraction. Instead, gravity is simply what happens when mass and energy bend the very fabric of space and time. Imagine you're resting peacefully in a hammock on a summer evening, the fabric supporting you in perfect balance. Now imagine someone, perhaps a friend, perhaps the universe itself, slowly presses down in the middle of that hammock. The fabric curves, dips, creates a well in what was once flat. Everything nearby begins to roll toward that depression, not because they're being pulled by some mysterious force, but because the hammock itself has changed shape. They're simply following the path of least resistance down the curve. This is Einstein's gravity, not a pull, but a push, not a force reaching across emptiness, but the shape of emptiness itself, bent and warped by the presence of matter and energy. When you drop that apple, it doesn't fall because the Earth is pulling it down. It falls because the Earth's mass has curved space-time in such a way that what we call down is actually the straightest possible path through bent reality. Picture it this way. If space were a vast, flat sheet of cosmic fabric, and here we must stretch our imagination thin, because this fabric exists in dimensions our minds can barely grasp, then every star, every planet, every galaxy would press down into it like heavy marbles on a trampoline. The sun creates a deep well, and the planets orbit not because they're being pulled, but because they're rolling along the curved edges of that well, trapped in an endless dance around a depression in the universe itself. It's a vision so beautiful it almost seems too elegant to be true. Yet every measurement we've ever made confirms it. GPS satellites must account for the fact that time runs slightly faster in their high orbits, where gravity's curve is gentler. Light bends as it passes near massive objects, following the curvature of space-time like a river following the contours of a valley. Even the most sophisticated instruments on Earth detect tiny ripples in space-time itself. Gravitational waves when distant black holes collide and send tremors through the fabric of reality. So, which perspective is correct? Newton's force or Einstein's geometry? The answer, as often happens in physics, is both and neither. Newton's equations still guide our spacecraft to distant worlds and predict the tides with exquisite precision. Einstein's equations reveal deeper truths about the universe's architecture and become essential when dealing with extreme conditions: black holes, neutron stars, the universe itself expanding. But perhaps the most profound question isn't about equations at all. Is gravity a thing in any meaningful sense, or is it simply the way space and time behave when matter is present? When we ask what would happen if gravity turned off, are we imagining the cessation of a force? Or are we imagining space and time suddenly forgetting how to curve? It's a question that might keep you awake if you think about it too deeply. So let's not. Instead, let's simply acknowledge that gravity, whether force or geometry, is woven so fundamentally into the fabric of existence that imagining its absence is like imagining a world without geometry itself, without the basic architecture of up and down, here and there, now and then. You have never lived a single moment without gravity's gentle insistence. From your very first heartbeat in the womb to this quiet moment as you listen to these words, you have existed under the constant, invisible pressure of 9.8 meters per second squared. It is so fundamental to your experience that you barely notice it, like the weight of air on your skin or the sound of your own breathing. But gravity notices you. Every cell in your body, every drop of blood, every breath you take has been shaped by this downward pull. Your heart is a remarkable pump, but it's also working against gravity every time it sends blood upward to your brain. The elegant chambers and valves that keep you alive evolved specifically to push fluid uphill, to overcome the constant tug that wants to pull everything toward your feet. Stand up too quickly, and you feel gravity's hand as blood struggles momentarily to reach your head, creating that brief, dizzy reminder of the force that's been your silent companion all your life. Your bones, too, are gravity's children. The calcium frameworks that support you grew dense and strong, specifically because they had weight to bear. Astronauts who spend months in weightlessness return to Earth with bones that have forgotten their earthly purpose, grown thin and fragile in the absence of that constant, strengthening pressure. Your muscles tell the same story every step you take. Every movement you make is a small victory over the pull downward. Think of gravity as a quiet metronome, keeping time for the dance of existence. It sets the rhythm for how fast things fall, how high you can jump, how water flows from mountain to sea. It's the invisible conductor of an orchestra, where every instrument from falling rain to orbiting planets plays in perfect time. Watch a raindrop sometime, if you can catch one in the right light. See how it forms, clings for just a moment to whatever surface holds it, then finally surrenders to that downward call. Each drop is a tiny acrobat performing the same leap that everything on Earth performs countless times each second. The leap into gravity's arms. Some drops fall straight, others spiral and dance, but all follow the same fundamental choreography written into the geometry of space itself. The ocean tides rise and fall to gravity's rhythm, not just Earth's gravity, but the combined pull of moon and sun, creating a vast, slow breathing of the seas. Twice each day, the water reaches toward the moon, and twice it falls back, a pulse as regular and reliable as your own heartbeat. This is gravity written large, not just the Earth pulling on water, but celestial bodies pulling on each other across hundreds of thousands of miles of space. Even the air you breathe knows about gravity. The atmosphere clings to Earth not because it likes being here, but because gravity holds it close. Without that constant inward pull, every breath you've ever taken would have escaped into the vacuum of space long ago. The very fact that you can breathe, that there's atmosphere at all, is gravity's gift to life. You've never truly felt what it's like to be weightless for more than a heartbeat. Perhaps you've experienced that moment at the top of a swing, or during a brief jump, when for just an instant you hang suspended between up and down. But even then, gravity hasn't disappeared, it's simply been matched, temporarily, by other forces. True weightlessness, the complete absence of that downward pull, is something your body has never known. Your inner ear, that delicate instrument that tells you which way is up, would be utterly confused without gravity's constant reference. Those tiny crystals and fluid-filled chambers that keep you balanced depend entirely on knowing where down is. In weightlessness, astronauts often feel nauseated and disoriented until their brains learn to navigate a world without a clear up or down. Every structure humans have ever built acknowledges gravity's presence. Foundations dig deep into the earth. Walls grow thick at the bottom. Roofs are designed to shed water downward. Our architecture is a conversation with this invisible force. every building a testament to our understanding that things naturally want to fall. As you lie there now, feel the weight of your body pressed against whatever surface supports you. That gentle pressure, that sense of being held, is gravity's constant embrace. It's been with you through every moment of your life, when you learned to walk by fighting against its pull, when you've stumbled and felt its quick reminder of who's in charge, when you've simply stood still and felt the reassuring certainty of down. In a few minutes, we'll imagine what happens when this faithful companion suddenly vanishes. But for now, just rest in the knowledge that you are held, gently but firmly, by a force that connects you to everything else in the universe, to the earth beneath you, to the moon above, to distant stars, whose gravity tugs on you, with pulls too faint to feel but real nonetheless. You are part of a vast, interconnected web of attraction, a cosmic family held together by the same force that keeps your feet on the ground and your dreams from floating away into the night. Imagine it happens on a Tuesday morning. Perhaps it's 11:47 a.m., somewhere between the rustle of coffee shops and the distant hum of traffic. The universe doesn't announce the change, there's no cosmic alarm, no warning bell. Gravity simply stops. In that first second, the world holds its breath. A sparrow, mid-wing beat above a park pond, suddenly finds itself no longer fighting against the downward pull. Its wings, evolved over millions of years to push against both air and gravity's insistence, now carry it upward in a gentle, confused arc. The bird doesn't understand what's happening. It only knows that up has become surprisingly easy. Every other flying creature shares this bewildering moment. Bees drift higher than they intended. Butterflies find themselves ascending like tiny balloons. Aircraft pilots feel their stomachs drop as their planes begin to rise beyond their planned altitude. But it's not just the flying things that feel the change. Every molecule of air in Earth's atmosphere, no longer held in place by gravity's gentle pressure, begins to drift. The process starts slowly. Air is light, and Earth's atmosphere is vast, but it begins nonetheless. That breath you're taking right now would start to thin, imperceptibly at first, as the very air around you forgets which way is down. Look at the ocean. For a moment, picture any coastline you know, perhaps waves rolling steadily onto a sandy beach, or crashing against rocky cliffs. In the first second after gravity stops, something extraordinary happens. The water, no longer pulled downward, begins to rise, not violently, not like an explosion, but with the strange, dreamlike quality of liquid in zero gravity. The ocean swells upward in shimmering blue columns, each wave suddenly free to grow as tall as physics and momentum allow. Coastal cities would watch in wonder as their harbors transform into slowly ascending walls of water, beautiful and impossible. In your room right now, wherever you are, imagine every loose object beginning its own lazy dance. Dust motes that normally settle toward the floor instead drift upward, catching the light like microscopic stars. Any strand of hair not held down by gravity's gentle tug starts to float, creating an ethereal halo around everyone's head. Papers on desks begin to lift, coins roll off tables and continue floating. Coffee cups tip and spill their contents into perfect spherical droplets that hang suspended in the air like amber jewels. The soundscape of the world begins to change too. Without gravity pressing down on everything, the very nature of how sound travels shifts. Air molecules, no longer compressed by their own weight, create a different medium for sound waves. The rushing of wind, normally driven by air falling from high pressure to low, grows quiet. The constant background noise of things settling, of weight pressing against weight, simply stops. What remains is an otherworldly stillness, not silence, exactly, but the sound of a world suddenly made weightless. Children playing in schoolyards find their jumps carrying them impossibly high. A basketball tossed toward a hoop sails upward and keeps going, past the rim, past the backboard, toward the sky. Swings hang motionless, their chains slack, while the children who were swinging moments before drift gently upward, laughing in delighted confusion. Animals react with the ancient wisdom of instinct. Dogs and cats, creatures whose entire sense of balance depends on knowing which way is down, become disoriented. Birds landing on branches find themselves floating slightly above the perch they aimed for. Horses in fields take hesitant steps, their hooves no longer pressed firmly to the ground, but instead making soft, weightless contact with earth that no longer pulls them down. But perhaps most strange of all is the feeling in your own body. In this first second, every drop of blood in your veins, every organ in your torso, every bone and muscle and nerve experiences something utterly foreign. Your heart, That faithful pump that has spent your entire life working against gravity to push blood upward to your brain suddenly finds its job both easier and more confusing. Blood that normally pools in your legs begins to drift, redistributing itself according to new rules your body doesn't understand. Your inner ear, that delicate instrument of balance, sends confused signals to your brain. Which way is up? The question, so fundamental to your existence that you've never had to think about it, suddenly has no answer. You might feel dizzy, or nauseated, or simply profoundly disoriented, not unlike the seasickness that comes from being on a boat, but stranger, because at least the ocean still acknowledges up and down. The trees around you begin their own strange dance. Leaves, no longer pulled downward by their own weight, hang differently on their branches. Fruit that was ready to fall instead clings with whatever small adhesive force held it in place, while ripe apples and oranges begin to drift away from their trees like colourful balloons. In this first second, the Earth itself doesn't know what's happening. The vast tectonic plates, normally pressed together and held in place partly by gravitational forces, begin to feel different stresses. Mountains, those monuments to gravity's ability to compress and uplift rock over millions of years, start to experience new forces as the weight that shaped them disappears. And through it all, you remain mostly where you are, held in place for now by inertia, by friction, by the simple fact that motion doesn't change instantly. But everything around you has begun the strangest transformation in Earth's history. A world learning to exist without the force that created it, shaped it, and held it together for 4.5 billion years. The first second ends, but the changes have only just begun. As the seconds tick by, what began as wonder starts to become something else. A slow-motion catastrophe so beautiful and terrible that words seem inadequate. Earth's atmosphere, that thin blue blanket that has kept us alive for all of human history, begins its escape. Not dramatically, not like air rushing out of a punctured balloon, but with the inexorable patience of physics. Without gravity to hold it close, every molecule of oxygen and nitrogen that makes up the air you breathe starts drifting away from Earth. The process is slow at first, the atmosphere is vast, and molecular motion is gentle, but it's also unstoppable. You might notice it as a subtle change in the quality of light. The sky, normally blue because of how Earth's atmosphere scatters sunlight, begins to look different. Subtly thinner, perhaps, or strangely clear. The horizon, usually softened by miles of air, grows sharper. Stars, normally invisible during the day, begin to appear faintly in the afternoon sky, as the atmospheric curtain that hides them slowly draws back. But there's something else happening too. Something that reveals just how precisely our everyday existence depends on gravity's constant pull. You are moving. Right now, as you sit or lie still, you are spinning with the Earth at roughly 10 miles per hour at the equator. Slower if you're closer to the poles, but moving nonetheless. Normally, gravity holds you to the planet's surface. Despite this rotation, you spin with the Earth, because the Earth's gravity keeps you anchored to it. But without that anchoring force, Newton's first law takes over. Objects in motion tend to stay in motion in a straight line. So as the Earth continues its rotation, you begin to drift. Slowly, gently, but definitively, you start moving in whatever direction the Earth's rotation was carrying you. If you're near the equator, you drift eastward. The sensation would be subtle at first, like the gentle push you might feel in a slowly accelerating car, but it's real. Over the course of this first minute, you and everything else on Earth's surface begin a lazy, sideways dance away from the planet that has been your home. Buildings, those monuments to humanity's confidence in gravity, begin to come apart. Not explosively, there are no dramatic collapses or thunderous crashes. Instead, they disassemble themselves with dreamlike slowness. The foundations that anchored them to bedrock no longer serve their purpose. The joints and supports designed to bear weight downward find themselves suddenly irrelevant. Skyscrapers begin to drift apart floor by floor, each level floating away like a massive architectural lily pad on an invisible pond. Picture your favorite city skyline, perhaps the familiar silhouette of tall buildings against the horizon that says, "Home to you." Now imagine watching that skyline slowly dissolve into a three-dimensional cloud of floating debris. Windows drift away from their frames, doors hang open to nothing, elevator shafts become vertical tubes through which air flows freely upward. It's destruction. But destruction so gentle it looks almost peaceful, like watching a sandcastle dissolve in slow motion underwater. Cars roll gently off roads and continue floating upward. Not fast, there's no sudden launch, but with the steady patience of bubbles rising in champagne. Traffic jams become three-dimensional sculptures of floating vehicles, their drivers floating inside them, hands still gripping, steering wheels that no longer steer anything meaningful. In your own space, your bedroom, your living room, wherever you are, every object tells its own story of liberation from weight. Books float away from shelves, their pages fluttering open like butterfly wings. Picture frames drift away from walls, revealing the clean rectangles of wallpaper they once protected. Houseplants, their roots no longer anchored by the weight of soil, begin to float in spherical clouds of earth and moisture. If you have pets, watch them navigate this new world with the adaptability that has kept their species alive for millions of years. Dogs paddle through the air as if swimming, their legs moving in the familiar motions of running but carrying them in impossible directions. Cats, those masters of balance and grace, seem least disturbed by the change they've always moved, as if gravity were merely a suggestion anyway. The ocean, meanwhile, continues its magnificent escape from Earth's surface. What began as gentle swelling has become something extraordinary. Vast columns of water rising into the sky like liquid mountains. Coastal cities find themselves surrounded by walls of ascending seawater that catch and scatter sunlight in ways no human has ever seen. Fish swim upward through this vertical ocean, following the water they've known all their lives as it climbs towards space. Whales, those gentle giants who have spent millions of years learning to navigate in 3 dimensions underwater, find themselves surprisingly well adapted to this new, airborne ocean. The weather, that complex dance of air pressure and temperature that has shaped climate for billions of years, begins to break down. Without gravity to create the pressure differences that drive wind and storm, the atmosphere becomes still in a way it has never been still before. Clouds, no longer held together by the weight of water droplets, begin to dissipate into gentle mists that drift upward and outward. Birds, perhaps the most prepared for this new world among all Earth's creatures, begin to adapt. Their hollow bones and efficient respiratory systems serve them well, as the air grows thinner and movement becomes 3-dimensional in ways they never experienced. Some fly upward, following their instincts toward open sky. Others, confused by the lack of ground effect and thermal currents, spiral in gentle confusion. And through it all, you float. Perhaps you've managed to grab onto something solid, a doorframe, a heavy piece of furniture, but even those anchors are temporary. Everything is drifting now, including you. Your hair floats around your head like a halo, your clothes hang differently on your body, and every movement you make sends you drifting in directions that feel both graceful and completely wrong. The minute passes, but the transformation has gained momentum. What started as a moment of wonder has become something larger, a world learning to exist in a way it was never meant to exist, beautiful and impossible, and utterly changed. As the minutes accumulate into an hour, the scope of change expands beyond anything earthbound, beyond anything human scale can easily comprehend. The story is no longer just about floating objects and rising oceans. It's about Earth itself becoming unmoored from its place in the cosmic order. For 4.5 billion years, our planet has traced a careful ellipse around the Sun, held in its orbital dance by the precise balance between gravity's inward pull and the momentum that wants to carry us in a straight line through space. Without gravity to bend our path, Newton's first law asserts itself on a planetary scale. Earth, like every object in motion, continues moving in a straight line. Picture it this way. Imagine you're at a carnival, spinning on one of those rides where you stand against the wall while everything rotates. The ride spins faster and faster, pressing you against the wall with centrifugal force. Then, suddenly, the wall disappears. You don't stop spinning, you fly off in whatever direction you were moving when the wall vanished. Earth, in its orbit around the Sun, is like that carnival ride. Gravity is the wall, and now the wall is gone. Our planet begins its journey away from the solar system, carrying with it everyone and everything that has ever called Earth home. But this isn't a dramatic launch or explosive departure. It's more like a balloon cut loose from a bright party, drifting slowly but inevitably away from the light and warmth into the quiet dark of interstellar space. The Sun, that faithful companion that has warmed our world and made life possible, begins to shrink in our sky. Not quickly, space is vast, and planetary motion is stately but definitively. Day by day, week by week, month by month, the solar disk that has been the central fact of existence for every living thing on Earth will grow smaller and dimmer in our sky. But let's return to what you might witness in this first hour, because the human-scale drama is still unfolding around you. The atmosphere's escape has accelerated. What was a gentle thinning in the first minute has become more noticeable now. Breathing feels different, not yet difficult, but somehow less satisfying, like trying to fill your lungs at high altitude. The sky above you has transformed into something alien. Deep blue-black even in daylight, stars clearly visible at noon, the sun shining like a brilliant jewel against the darkness of space. Animals everywhere struggle to adapt to conditions no evolutionary process ever prepared them for. Birds, those masters of three-dimensional movement, find themselves in a world where the rules of flight have fundamentally changed. Without gravity to provide consistent down, without air pressure, creating the thermal columns they've relied on for millions of years, many simply stop flying and drift, their wings spread wide like organic parachutes in the thinning air. Mammals face their own bewildering challenges. Horses drift above meadows, their legs making galloping motions that carry them in slow spirals through the air. Deer bound upward in graceful arcs that never come down. Dogs and cats paddle through the air with the swimming motions that served their ancestors in water, but seem strangely appropriate for this new, atmosphere-light world. Humans, perhaps uniquely among Earth's creatures, begin to adapt psychologically to weightlessness. Some experience the euphoria that astronauts describe, the joy of three-dimensional movement, of being able to swim through air, of finally understanding what birds have always known about the freedom of flight. Others struggle with nausea, disorientation, and the profound psychological challenge of living without up or down. Children adapt fastest, as they always do. Playgrounds become three-dimensional jungles where swings drift at odd angles, and slides become launching ramps into the air. Kids laugh as they push off from floating jungle gyms and sail through the air in ways that would have terrified them just hours before. Their adaptability offers hope that humanity might survive this transition, even as adults struggle with the loss of everything familiar. Buildings continue their slow-motion disassembly. What were once proud skylines have become floating debris fields of architectural elements. Yet there's something almost beautiful about it, watching a cathedral spire drift serenely through the air, its Gothic arches framing the stars that are now visible in broad daylight. Office buildings become transparent towers as their floors separate and float away, leaving only the skeletal frameworks that once supported tons of concrete and steel. The ocean's transformation has become spectacular beyond imagination. Coastal regions find themselves surrounded by towering walls of seawater that rise like liquid mountains toward the sky. The water moves in ways it never could when gravity held it to the ocean floor. Vast, spherical droplets the size of buildings drift through the air, each one a perfect lens that refracts sunlight into prismatic rainbows. Marine life swims through this vertical ocean, following the water they've always known as it migrates toward space. Transportation systems, designed entirely around the assumption of consistent gravity, have become useless and dangerous. Airplanes, their control surfaces designed to work against air held in place by gravity, find themselves impossible to control as the atmosphere grows thin and unpredictable. Cars, trains, and trucks drift like toys in a gentle flood, their wheels spinning uselessly in air instead of gripping roads. But perhaps most profound is the change in the soundscape of the world. Without gravity to compress air into predictable pressure patterns, sound travels differently. The constant background noise of civilization, cars on roads, footsteps on pavement, the settling of buildings under their own weight has been replaced by something utterly alien, the gentle whisper of billions of objects drifting through thinning air. You, floating now in whatever space you called home an hour ago, might notice how different your own voice sounds. Words don't carry quite the same way they did when air was denser, when your feet were planted firmly on solid ground, when up and down were facts rather than memories. Your body, meanwhile, continues its own adaptation to weightlessness. Blood that normally pools in your legs has redistributed throughout your system, making your face feel puffy, your sinuses congested. Your inner ear still sends confused signals about which way is up, though your brain is slowly learning to ignore the question entirely. As this first hour ends, you might find yourself wondering, is this beautiful or terrible? The answer, like so many things in this new weightless world, seems to float somewhere between the two. It's the end of the world as anyone has ever known it, but it's also the beginning of something no life form has ever experienced. Existence without the fundamental force that created the conditions for existence itself. The transformation continues, and its true scope is only beginning to become clear. 3 days have passed since gravity abandoned Earth, and the planet's transformation has entered a phase so extraordinary that no word in any human language adequately captures what has become of our world. The blue marble that astronauts once photographed from space, that perfect sphere of swirling white clouds above brown continents and azure seas, no longer exists in any form recognizable to the billions of species that once called it home. The oceans, those vast bodies of water that covered 71% of Earth's surface and contained 99% of all living space on the planet, have become something entirely new, a three-dimensional archipelago of floating seas suspended in what was once our atmosphere. Where the Pacific Ocean once spread in a gentle curve from California to Japan, there now drifts a collection of water masses that defy every assumption we've ever held about how oceans behave. Some are perfect spheres the size of mountains, held together by their own surface tension and the cohesive properties of water molecules. Others stretch into vast, undulating ribbons that snake through the sky, like liquid rivers flowing through air instead of riverbeds. The largest of these floating seas span kilometers in diameter, each one a complete ecosystem suspended impossibly in space. From a distance, if there were anywhere to gain such perspective now, these aerial oceans catch and scatter sunlight in ways that would have seemed magical just days ago. Each massive droplet acts as a gigantic lens, refracting the sun's rays into spectacular displays of color. Rainbow halos surround the larger water masses, while smaller ones sparkle like enormous jewels scattered across the darkening sky. The sight would be breathtaking if there were still a stable vantage point from which to breathe, but it's what lives inside these floating oceans that transforms spectacle into something approaching the miraculous. Marine life, from the tiniest plankton to the largest whales, continues to exist within these suspended seas, creating scenes that no evolutionary process could have prepared them for. Schools of tuna swim in perfect formation through spherical oceans, their bodies adapted for cutting through water now carrying them in three-dimensional spirals around the curved interior of their floating world. They follow currents that flow in loops and eddies impossible in any earthbound sea, guided by instincts that somehow remain functional even in this weightless aquarium. Picture looking up, though. Up has lost much of its meaning, and seeing a blue whale drifting slowly overhead, its massive form suspended in the center of a water sphere larger than most city blocks. The whale moves with the same graceful efficiency it always has, but now its movements carry it in gentle arcs around the curved walls of its aerial home. Its songs, those deep harmonic calls that once traveled for hundreds of miles through Earth's oceans, now resonate through these floating seas in patterns both familiar and utterly strange. Dolphins, those playful geniuses of the sea, seem almost to thrive in this new environment. Their natural three-dimensional thinking serves them well in spherical oceans where there is no surface to break through, no seafloor to avoid. They spiral through their floating homes with what might almost be joy, their echolocation painting sonic pictures of curved water walls and the vast emptiness beyond. Coral reefs, those bustling cities of the sea, continue their ancient work of building and growing, but now they form structures impossible in any gravity-bound ocean. Without the constant downward pressure that once shaped them, coral formations grow into fantastic three-dimensional sculptures that spiral outward in all directions from their rocky cores. Fish that once lived at specific depths now swim freely throughout their floating reef systems, creating vertical schools that move like living tornadoes through the water. The smaller floating seas tell their own remarkable stories. Jellyfish drift within water spheres only slightly larger than themselves, pulsing with their ancient rhythm as they move through their microscopic oceans. Seahorses curl their tails around strands of floating seaweed in displays of adaptation that speak to life's incredible resilience. Even the tiniest organisms, copepods, krill, plankton, continue their essential work of forming the base of marine food chains, but now they do it while drifting through an ocean that itself drifts through the sky. Perhaps most remarkably, these floating oceans have begun to interact with each other. When two water masses drift close enough, they merge in displays of fluid dynamics that would fascinate physicists if there were still universities where physicists could gather to study such things. The merger isn't violent, there are no crashing waves or dramatic collisions. Instead, the spheres touch, blend, and become one larger sphere, their ecosystems mixing in real-time evolutionary experiments that compress millions of years of natural selection into moments. Sometimes the mergers create temporary bridges of water between distant floating seas, allowing marine life to swim from one aerial ocean to another, like aquatic astronauts traveling between space stations. A school of mackerel might swim through such a bridge, leaving one ecosystem and entering another, carrying with them genetic material, nutrients, and the ancient patterns of oceanic migration adapted to a world without fixed geography. The largest of these floating oceans have begun to develop their own weather systems. Clouds form within the water masses themselves, pockets of warmer water, creating convection currents that generate their own internal precipitation. Rain falls upward, downward, and sideways within these spherical seas, creating freshwater layers that float within the saltwater matrix like three-dimensional rivers threading through underwater space. At night, the floating oceans become even more magical. Bioluminescent organisms, those living stars of the deep sea, continue their ancient light shows, but now their displays illuminate entire floating spheres from within. Spherical seas glow like enormous paper lanterns drifting through the darkness, each one pulsing with the collective light of billions of microscopic organisms, going about their business of survival in the strangest environment life has ever encountered. The temperature regulation that Earth's vast oceans once provided has been lost. These floating water masses, exposed to the vacuum of space on one side and the thin remains of Earth's atmosphere on the other, experience temperature fluctuations that would have been impossible in the planet's original configuration. Some freeze into spectacular ice sculptures, kilometer-wide spheres of frozen seawater that trap their ecosystems in crystalline suspension. Others, exposed to direct sunlight without the atmosphere's protective filtering, heat beyond anything their inhabitants have ever experienced. Yet even in these extreme conditions, life adapts. Fish populations shift and migrate within their floating homes, seeking the temperature zones that allow survival. Arctic species, once confined to polar seas, might find themselves sharing a floating ocean with tropical fish, creating unlikely communities that evolution never had the chance to design. The boundaries between oceanic zones, tropical, temperate, polar, have been erased, replaced by a chaotic mixing of biomes that creates entirely new ecological relationships. Some floating oceans have captured pieces of the seafloor in their gravitational escape from Earth. These water masses contain entire deep-sea communities, tube worms, deep-sea fish, the strange ecosystems that cluster around hydrothermal vents, now suspended in mid-water rather than anchored to the bottom of the sea. The darkness they've always known remains, but the pressure that shaped their evolution has been replaced by the gentle, constant pressure that comes from living within a floating sphere of water. The sounds of these aerial oceans create a symphony unlike anything Earth has ever known. Whale songs echo through spherical acoustic chambers, their calls bouncing off curved water walls in harmonics that transform familiar melodies into something entirely new. The clicking of dolphins, the low-frequency rumbles of large fish, the high-pitched calls of countless smaller creatures, all of it reverberates through these floating worlds in ways that would have been impossible when oceans were anchored to the planet's surface. From within one of these floating seas, looking outward through the curved wall of water, a fish might see other aerial oceans drifting past like enormous blue planets, each one carrying its own cargo of life. The view from inside looking out would be like living within a snow globe that contains an ocean, watching other snow globes drift past in the darkness, each one illuminated from within by the bioluminescence of its inhabitants. As days pass, these floating oceans continue their slow drift away from Earth's surface, carrying with them the largest intact ecosystems remaining from the planet's original configuration. They are life rafts, arcs, floating biospheres that contain the accumulated evolutionary wisdom of billions of years of oceanic life. Whether that life can adapt quickly enough to survive in these impossible conditions remains one of the most profound questions in this new world without gravity. But for now, 3 days after gravity's departure, they continue. Whales singing in spherical seas, dolphins playing in three-dimensional currents, countless smaller creatures going about the ancient business of survival in a habitat that no creature was ever designed to inhabit. They are the ocean's refugees, floating through space in their water ships, carrying forward the memory of a blue planet that once held seas steady in their basins, but now exists only in the graceful, impossible architecture of oceans in the sky. A week has passed since gravity released its hold on Earth, and the atmosphere that once wrapped our planet like a protective blanket has transformed into something alien and increasingly hostile to the life it once sustained. The air you breathe, if you can still breathe, it carries with it the story of a world learning to exist without the fundamental force that made breathing possible in the first place. Without gravity to compress atmospheric gases into layers of predictable pressure, Earth's atmosphere has begun to disperse into space with the patience of physics and the inevitability of entropy. The process isn't dramatic, there are no sudden gasps for air or explosive decompressions. Instead, it's like watching a slow leak from a balloon that never stops, a gradual thinning that makes each breath slightly less satisfying than the one before. The air pressure at what was once sea level, though sea level has lost all meaning in a world where seas float freely through space, has dropped to roughly half of what it was just days ago. For humans and other air-breathing creatures, this change manifests as a constant feeling of being at high altitude. Breath comes shorter, hearts beat faster, and the simple act of walking, or rather, floating, becomes more exhausting than it once was. But it's not just the thinning that changes how air feels and behaves. Without gravity to hold atmospheric layers in stable configurations, the gases that make up our breathing mixture have begun to separate and redistribute according to their molecular weights and the random motions of kinetic energy. The careful balance of nitrogen, oxygen, and trace gases that once maintained life has become chaotic, creating pockets of gas concentrations that vary wildly from place to place. In some areas, oxygen has concentrated into regions of almost pure, breathable air, gifts of chance, molecular motion that create temporary oases for air-breathing life. In others, heavier gases like carbon dioxide have pooled into invisible lakes of unbreathable atmosphere that would quietly suffocate anyone unfortunate enough to drift into them. The atmospheric geography of Earth has become a three-dimensional maze of gas pockets, each with its own chemical signature and life-sustaining properties. Weather, that complex dance of air pressure and temperature that has shaped climate for billions of years, has ceased to exist in any form recognizable to meteorology. Without gravity to create the pressure differences that drive wind systems, the atmosphere has grown strangely still. There are no more hurricanes building strength over warm ocean waters, no more cold fronts moving across continents, no more jet streams carrying weather patterns around the globe. Instead, there are only gentle, random currents caused by temperature differences and the residual motion of air masses that remember the weather patterns of a world that no longer exists. The silence is perhaps the most unsettling change. Without wind rushing through trees, without the constant background whisper of air moving across landscapes, without the settling sounds of a world held together by weight, Earth has become acoustically alien. Sounds travel differently through the thinning, unpressurized air. Voices carry shorter distances, but sometimes echo strangely off floating debris. The soundscape of the world has been replaced by something that might be described as a whispered hush. The gentle rustle of billions of objects drifting through air too thin to support the robust acoustics of the world that was. Plant life, those green engines that have spent hundreds of millions of years converting sunlight and carbon dioxide into the oxygen that makes animal life possible, face challenges that no evolutionary process prepared them for. Without gravity to pull water through their root systems and up through their stems, most plants have begun to die. The elegant vascular systems that once carried nutrients from soil to leaves have become useless in a world where soil floats away and water forms spherical droplets that drift beyond the reach of any root system. Trees, those ancient monuments to the partnership between plant life and gravity, tell perhaps the saddest story of all. An oak tree that spent a century growing toward the sun, its roots anchored deep in earth, its trunk straight and strong from decades of growing against gravitational pull, now drifts through the air like a piece of living driftwood. Its leaves, no longer supplied with water and nutrients from below, have begun to wither. Its massive root system, exposed and useless, dangles below the floating trunk like the tentacles of some impossible aerial creature. But life, that remarkable force that has survived ice ages and asteroid impacts and volcanic winters, has begun to adapt even to this most impossible of circumstances. Some plants, particularly those adapted to epiphytic life, the air plants and bromeliads that never depended heavily on root systems, continue to photosynthesize using whatever water they can absorb directly from the humid air around them. They drift like floating gardens through the atmosphere, their leaves spread wide to catch both sunlight and moisture from their aerial environment. Certain species of moss and lichen, those hardy pioneers that colonize the most extreme environments on Earth, have proven surprisingly adaptable to weightlessness. They form floating mats of green that drift through the air like living carpets, absorbing moisture from the atmosphere and continuing their slow work of photosynthesis, even in conditions that would have seemed impossible just days ago. The temperature regulation that Earth's atmosphere once provided has been lost, along with the atmosphere's density and circulation patterns. Without the moderating influence of atmospheric layers and weather systems, surface temperatures have become wildly unstable. Areas exposed to direct sunlight heat beyond anything most life forms can tolerate, while shaded regions grow cold enough to freeze the water vapor in what remains of the air. Day and night, those fundamental rhythms that have governed life on Earth since its beginning, have become extreme experiences. Without an atmosphere to diffuse and moderate the sun's energy, daytime temperatures soar to levels that would have been impossible under the protective blanket of a gravity-held atmosphere. Conversely, without atmospheric insulation, nighttime brings cold that reaches toward the absolute zero of space itself. This temperature instability creates its own atmospheric phenomena. Dramatic thermal differences cause the remaining air to move in convection patterns unlike anything Earth's weather systems ever produced. Warm air rises with unusual speed in the low-pressure environment, creating thermal columns that stretch much higher than would have been possible under normal atmospheric conditions. These columns become highways for floating debris, carrying everything from leaves to pieces of buildings upward in slow-motion tornadoes that spiral through the thinning air. Human settlements, those carefully engineered environments designed to maintain comfortable atmospheric conditions, have become critical refuges for survival. Buildings with intact climate control systems create pockets of pressurized, temperature-controlled air that serve as life support islands in an increasingly hostile atmosphere. But these refuges are temporary. Their air conditioning systems were designed to work against normal atmospheric pressure, not to contain atmosphere against the vacuum of space. Those humans who survive in these pressurized environments face the psychological challenge of living in what amounts to a space station that happens to be located on Earth's surface. Windows, that once framed familiar views of trees and sky, now look out on landscapes of floating debris and the strange geometry of objects, drifting in three-dimensional patterns through air too thin to support flight. The few aircraft that were in flight when gravity disappeared have become inadvertent laboratories for studying atmospheric changes. Their sealed cabins maintain pressurized environments for their passengers, but their control systems, designed for flying through normal atmospheric density, have become useless for navigation. These flying refuges drift through the thinning air, their engines unable to generate enough thrust in the low-pressure environment to maintain powered flight, their passengers looking down through cabin windows at a world that grows more alien with each passing hour. Birds, those masters of atmospheric flight, face perhaps the greatest challenge of adaptation. Their entire physiology, hollow bones, efficient respiratory systems, wings designed for generating lift in specific atmospheric conditions, has been rendered almost useless by the changes in air density and pressure. Some smaller birds have adapted by treating the new environment more like swimming than flying, using their wing movements to paddle through the thinner air in motions that resemble underwater flight more than aerial soaring. Larger birds, whose flight depends on thermal columns and air pressure differences, have largely ceased flying altogether. Eagles and hawks drift through the air like feathered debris, their powerful wings spread wide but generating no meaningful lift. Many have begun to adapt by using their wings more like parachutes, controlling their drift through the atmosphere rather than powering through it. The scents and chemical communications that many species depend on for survival have been disrupted by the atmospheric changes. Flowers that once advertised their presence to pollinators through airborne chemicals find their molecular messages dispersed too quickly in the thin air to be effective. Animals that navigate by scent discover that odor trails dissipate almost immediately in the unpressurized environment. Yet even in these impossible conditions, some forms of chemical communication persist. Pheromones and other molecular signals concentrate in the pockets of denser air that occasionally form through random atmospheric motion. These chemical oases become gathering points for species that still rely on scent for reproduction and social organization, creating temporary communities that form around shared atmospheric resources. As the second week begins, the atmospheric changes have created a world where the simple act of breathing has become an adventure in survival. Each breath carries with it the uncertainty of composition and the knowledge that the envelope of life-sustaining air grows thinner with each passing day. The sky, once blue with scattered sunlight, has become the deep black of space punctuated by the brilliant white of unfiltered sunshine. The atmosphere that once connected all air-breathing life in a shared envelope of breathable gas has fractured into a three-dimensional archipelago of air pockets, each with its own chemical composition and life-sustaining properties. Breathing has become not just a biological necessity, but a form of atmospheric navigation, as life learns to migrate from one pocket of breathable air to another in the vast, thinning envelope of what was once Earth's protective atmosphere. 2 weeks have passed since gravity abandoned the solar system, and the scope of transformation has expanded beyond Earth, beyond atmospheric concerns, beyond any single planet's struggle for survival. What began as the story of floating objects and rising seas has become something far grander and more catastrophic: the dissolution of orbital mechanics itself, and the transformation of our ordered solar system into a chaotic field of wandering objects. The dance that once held planets, moons, asteroids, and artificial satellites in predictable paths around the sun has ended. Without gravity to bend the trajectories of celestial bodies into stable orbits, every object in the solar system has begun moving in straight lines, according to whatever velocity it possessed at the moment gravity stopped. The result is a cosmic game of billiards played on an unimaginably vast scale, with planets and moons as the balls and the entire solar system as the table. Earth itself, no longer held in its careful elliptical orbit around the sun, continues its journey away from the solar system at roughly 30 kilometers per second, the speed at which it was orbiting when gravity released its hold. From the perspective of someone floating in what remains of Earth's atmosphere, the sun appears to shrink with each passing day, its disk growing smaller and dimmer as our planet carries its cargo of life on a one-way journey toward interstellar space. But Earth is not alone in this exodus. Every planet in the solar system has begun its own straight-line journey into the cosmic dark, each following whatever trajectory its orbital velocity dictated at the moment of gravity's departure. Mars, moving at 24 kilometers per second, heads off in its own direction. Venus, with its 35 kilometers per second orbital speed, races ahead on yet another path. The stately, ordered progression of planets around their central star has dissolved into an expanding cloud of worlds, each carrying its own story of geological history and potential life toward uncertain destinations in the void between stars. The outer planets tell their own remarkable stories of dissolution. Jupiter, that massive guardian whose gravitational influence once swept the inner solar system clear of dangerous asteroids, now drifts away at 13 kilometers per second, carrying with it a complex system of moons that no longer orbit anything. Europa, Io, Ganymede, and Callisto, those icy and volcanic worlds that once danced in precise gravitational choreography, around their giant parent, now drift alongside Jupiter, like a small fleet of escort vessels accompanying a massive ship on a journey to nowhere. Saturn's rings, those spectacular bands of ice and rock particles that have captivated human imagination since Galileo first glimpsed them through his primitive telescope, have become something entirely different. Without Saturn's gravity to hold the ring particles in their flat, circular orbits, the rings have expanded into a three-dimensional cloud of debris that accompanies the giant planet on its journey into deep space. What was once a thin, elegant disk has become a spherical halo of tumbling ice chunks and rocky fragments, each piece following its own trajectory, while remaining roughly clustered around the planet that once held them in such perfect order. The asteroid belt, that region between Mars and Jupiter where millions of rocky fragments once orbited the Sun in relatively stable paths, has dispersed into the largest debris field in solar system history. Each asteroid, from tiny pebbles to mountain-sized chunks of rock and metal, now follows its own straight-line path through space. The belt has become a slowly expanding sphere of rocky projectiles, each one carrying the potential for catastrophic collision with any other object unfortunate enough to cross its path. But perhaps most poignant is the fate of Earth's moon, that faithful companion that has influenced our planet's tides, stabilized its axial tilt, and inspired countless generations of human poetry and romance. The moon, no longer held in its orbit around Earth, has begun its own independent journey through space, moving at roughly 1 kilometer per second relative to Earth at the moment gravity disappeared. Luna now drifts slowly away from the planet it has circled for more than 4 billion years. From Earth's surface, if you can find stable footing among the floating debris, you can watch this ancient goodbye unfold night by night. The moon, which once grew predictably larger and smaller in its monthly cycle, now simply grows smaller. Each evening, it appears as a slightly more distant disk in the star-filled sky. In a few months, it will be too far away to appear larger than a bright star. Within a year, it will be invisible to the naked eye, just another faint point of light in a cosmos that no longer remembers the gravitational bonds that once held it together. The artificial satellites that human ingenuity has launched into space over the past 7 decades have become part of this cosmic debris field. Communication satellites, weather monitoring stations, the International Space Station, spy satellites, and thousands of pieces of space junk now drift on whatever trajectories they were following when gravity ceased to exist. Some move away from Earth, following the planet's escape trajectory, but at slightly different velocities. Others, depending on their orbital characteristics at the moment of change, drift in entirely different directions. The International Space Station, that monument to human cooperation and our species' desire to live among the stars, has become a ghost ship drifting through space. If there were astronauts aboard when gravity stopped, and the thought is both tragic and strangely poetic, they would find themselves passengers on a vessel heading nowhere, watching Earth slowly shrink in the viewports as their space station follows its own trajectory away from the planet they can never return to. GPS satellites, those precise timepieces in the sky that once allowed humans to navigate with incredible accuracy, now broadcast their timing signals into empty space as they drift away from the planet they once served. Cell phone towers that once relayed communications to these satellites now point their antennas toward empty sky, searching for signals from transmitters that grow more distant with each passing minute. The space debris that human activity has scattered around Earth, broken satellites, spent rocket stages, fragments from collisions and explosions, has become part of a vast, slowly dispersing cloud that accompanies Earth on its journey toward interstellar space. This debris field, once confined to specific orbital shells around the planet, now extends in all directions, creating a three-dimensional maze of tumbling metal and plastic that tells the story of humanity's brief venture into space. But the dissolution of orbital mechanics has created phenomena that dwarf even these planetary-scale changes. Without the Sun's gravity to hold them in their distant, slow orbits, the Kuiper Belt objects and Oort cloud comets have begun their own exodus from the solar system. These icy remnants of the solar system's formation, some larger than Earth's moon, drift outward into the cosmic dark, carrying with them the frozen history of the solar system's birth 4.5 billion years ago. Pluto, that distant world that was once considered the 9th planet and then reclassified as a dwarf planet, now drifts through space, accompanied by its moon Charon, in a gravitational dance that has become meaningless. The two worlds, once locked in mutual orbit, now drift together like a pair of cosmic dancers whose music has stopped, but who continue their steps out of habit and momentum. The interactions between these wandering objects create possibilities for cosmic collisions on scales never before imaginable. Planets that once followed predictable paths now move through space on trajectories that could intersect with asteroids, comets, or even other planets. The ordered clockwork of the solar system, where orbital mechanics allowed astronomers to predict planetary positions centuries in advance, has been replaced by a chaotic system where collision probabilities must be calculated in real time and updated constantly as objects drift along their unpredictable paths. Some of these collisions have already begun. Small asteroids, no longer held in stable orbits, occasionally cross paths with dramatic results. When two mountain-sized chunks of rock collide at relative velocities of several kilometers per second, the explosion creates spectacular flashes of light visible from great distances. These cosmic fireworks illuminate the darkness between worlds, brief moments of violence and beauty in the vast emptiness that the solar system has become. The Sun itself, now alone at the center of what was once its gravitational domain, continues to shine with the same fusion fire that has warmed its planets for billions of years. But it shines now on an empty realm, its light reaching out to illuminate worlds that grow more distant with each passing day. The solar wind that once interacted with planetary magnetospheres in beautiful auroral displays now flows unimpeded into space, carrying with it the stars' charged particles toward destinations that will never feel their gentle pressure. From the perspective of someone floating among Earth's atmospheric debris, looking up at the star-filled sky, the night has become filled with moving points of light. Planets appear as wandering stars, growing dimmer as they recede into the distance. Occasionally, a brighter flash marks the collision of asteroids or the explosion of some piece of human space technology, succumbing to the stresses of its unplanned journey. The constellations, those patterns of stars that have guided human navigation and inspired mythology for thousands of years, remain unchanged. The stars are so distant that their light left them long before gravity disappeared from the solar system, and they are so far away that the solar system's dissolution appears to them as less significant than the movement of a single grain of sand in a vast desert. But between Earth and those distant stars, the local neighborhood of space has become a debris field of unprecedented scale and complexity. As the third week begins, the dance of space debris continues to evolve. Objects that were once held in stable, predictable orbits now follow trajectories that carry them on journeys, measured not in years or centuries, but in geological ages. The solar system, once a family of worlds bound together by invisible gravitational threads, has become a dispersing cloud of objects carrying the history of planetary formation into the cosmic dark each piece following its own path toward whatever strange new configurations might await in the vast emptiness between the stars. Like pearls rolling from a snapped necklace into the vast black carpet of the universe, the worlds and debris of our solar system spread outward into space, each following its own trajectory toward a future that no gravitational mechanics can predict. Each carrying with it the story of a star system that once held together in perfect orbital harmony, but now exists only as a memory scattered across the cosmos, in the form of wandering worlds, drifting forever toward the infinite dark. A month has passed since gravity released its hold on existence, and as Earth continues its solitary journey through the cosmic dark, carrying with it the scattered remnants of human civilization and the floating debris of a world that once knew up from down, we find ourselves confronting questions that go deeper than physics, beyond biology, into the very nature of what it means to exist in a universe suddenly stripped of its most fundamental organizing principle. Time itself has changed in ways that would have seemed impossible to imagine just weeks ago. Einstein taught us that gravity and time are intimately connected, that massive objects don't just bend space, they bend time as well. The phenomenon called gravitational time dilation means that time moves more slowly in stronger gravitational fields and more quickly in weaker ones. For the entire history of human timekeeping, we've lived at the bottom of Earth's gravitational well, where time moved fractionally slower than it would have in the emptiness of space. Now, with gravity gone, time has been liberated from its gravitational constraints. Atomic clocks, those precise instruments that measure the passage of seconds by counting the oscillations of cesium atoms, tick slightly faster than they did when gravity held sway. The difference is tiny mere nanoseconds per day, but it represents a fundamental change in the temporal fabric of existence. Time, which once flowed at rates determined by mass and energy warping spacetime, now flows at its maximum rate, unimpeded by gravitational effects. But the changes to time go beyond mere measurement. The biological rhythms that govern life's circadian cycles, seasonal patterns, the deep periodicities that regulate everything from sleep to reproduction were all calibrated to a world where gravity provided a constant reference point. Plants that once grew toward the sun, using gravity to determine which direction was up, now exist in a three-dimensional world where photosynthesis must work without directional context. The very concept of toward has lost much of its meaning when there is no consistent down to provide orientation. Humans floating in the remnants of their atmosphere find that their biological clocks evolved over millions of years to respond to the rhythms of a gravity-bound world, struggle to adapt to this new reality. Sleep comes irregularly, when there is no gravitational pressure to tell the body when to rest. Appetite changes when food floats rather than settles in the stomach. Even the most basic biological functions, circulation, digestion, the sense of balance, operate according to principles that evolution never had to consider. The psychological implications stretch even further into the realm of philosophy. Human consciousness itself developed within the context of gravitational existence. Our most basic metaphors for understanding reality, concepts of rising and falling, of weight and lightness, of being grounded or unmoored, all depend on the gravitational experience that shaped our language and thought patterns over countless generations. Consider the way we understand emotions through gravitational metaphors. We speak of feeling down when sad, uplifted when happy, weighed down by responsibility, or light with joy. We describe deep thoughts as heavy and frivolous ones as light. Love is something we fall into, while enlightenment is something we rise to. These aren't merely linguistic conventions. They reflect the fundamental way gravitational existence shaped human consciousness and our understanding of meaning itself. In this new weightless world, do these metaphors retain their power? Can sadness still feel heavy when weight itself has lost all meaning? Does joy still lift the spirit when everything already floats? The human survivors of gravity's disappearance find themselves not just adapting to new physical conditions, but reconstructing the very language of human experience. Children, those remarkable adapters who build their understanding of the world from whatever conditions they encounter, may be developing entirely new metaphorical frameworks for understanding existence. A child born into this weightless world would think of normal as three-dimensional movement through space rather than walking on solid ground. Their dreams, their imaginative play, their deepest assumptions about how reality works would all be calibrated to weightlessness rather than gravitational existence. But perhaps the most profound philosophical question raised by gravity's absence concerns the nature of evolution and consciousness themselves. Would life as we know it have been possible without gravity to provide the organizing principles that shaped billions of years of biological development? Gravity gave early life forms a consistent reference point, a reliable direction that could be used for orientation and organization. Plants evolved to grow up toward light and down toward water and nutrients. Animals developed bilateral symmetry, partly in response to the need to move efficiently across gravitationally oriented surfaces. The very architecture of complex life, the way organs are arranged within bodies, the way skeletal systems provide support, the way nervous systems coordinate movement all emerged from evolutionary pressures that assumed gravity's constant presence. Without gravity, would multicellular life have developed at all? The processes that allow cells to organize into tissues and tissues into organs depend partly on physical forces that help cellular structures maintain their shape and orientation. In a purely weightless environment, would evolution have found different solutions to the problems of complexity and organization? Or would life have remained forever single-celled, floating as microscopic organisms in whatever fluid medium could support their basic chemistry? The question becomes even more intriguing when we consider consciousness itself. The human brain, that 3-pound universe of neurons and synapses that gives rise to thought, emotion, and self-awareness, developed within a gravitational context. The way neural networks organize themselves, the way brain structures develop during embryological growth, the way thoughts seem to flow and connect, all of this emerged from an evolutionary process that assumed gravity would provide consistent orientation and physical constraint. Would consciousness, as we experience it with its sense of continuous selfhood, its ability to form memories and plan for the future, its capacity for abstract thought have been possible without the gravitational framework that shaped neural development? Or would a weightless universe have given rise to entirely different forms of awareness, perhaps more fluid and distributed, less centered on individual brains, and more dispersed through whatever networks of matter and energy could support information processing? These questions take on practical urgency as human survivors adapt to their new weightless existence. Philosophers floating among the debris of their former world find that their most fundamental assumptions about existence must be reconsidered. The concept of being grounded in reality takes on new meaning when there is no ground to provide metaphorical stability. The idea of solid foundations for knowledge becomes questionable when solidity itself has been revealed as merely a temporary arrangement of matter held together by forces that can disappear. The social implications ripple outward through human communities, struggling to maintain cohesion without the shared reference point that gravity once provided. Human social structures, hierarchies, institutions, the very concept of higher and lower social positions, all emerged from metaphors rooted in gravitational experience. Kings ruled from above their subjects. Social climbing meant moving up in status. The weight of responsibility and the gravity of serious situations shaped the way humans understood power, authority, and social organization. In a weightless world, do these social metaphors retain their organizing power? Can leadership exist when the concept of being above others has lost its physical meaning? Human groups floating together in the remnants of Earth's atmosphere must develop new ways of understanding community, cooperation, and social organization that don't depend on gravitational metaphors of hierarchy and position. Love itself, that most fundamental of human experiences, must be reconsidered in this context. The phrase falling in love captures something essential about the experience of romantic attraction, the sense of being pulled by forces beyond one's control, the feeling of weight and inevitability, the metaphorical gravity that draws two people together. In a world without gravity, would love feel the same? Would the deep emotional bonds that connect humans retain their power when the physical forces that inspired the metaphors for those bonds have vanished? Young couples floating together through the atmosphere, their hair drifting in halos around their heads, their movements synchronized in the three-dimensional dance of weightless existence, might discover that love in a gravitationless world feels different, perhaps more like flying together than falling together, more like choosing to orbit around each other than being inevitably drawn by irresistible forces. The human sense of permanence and stability, so fundamental to psychological well-being, must also be reconstructed without gravitational anchors. Throughout human history, the solid ground beneath our feet provided a basic sense of security and continuity. Even in the most chaotic times, people could literally stand on solid ground and feel some connection to stability and permanence. Buildings, monuments, the very landscapes that shaped human cultures, all of these provided gravitational anchors for human meaning and identity. Now, with everything floating and drifting, with no fixed points of reference except the slowly shrinking sun and the distant stars, humans must develop entirely new ways of understanding permanence and meaning. Perhaps meaning becomes more fluid, more dynamic, located not in fixed structures, but in the patterns of relationship and movement that emerge among floating communities. Perhaps identity becomes less tied to place and position, and more connected to the networks of connection that bind people together even as they drift through space. Religious and spiritual frameworks face their own profound challenges in this weightless world. Many spiritual traditions locate the divine above the earthly realm, describing enlightenment as ascending to higher planes of existence. The idea of souls rising after death, of prayers being lifted up to heaven, of divine beings dwelling in the heavens above. All of these concepts must be reconsidered when up and down have lost their meaning. Some religious communities, floating among the debris, might find their faith deepened by the experience of literal transcendence from earthly gravity. Others might struggle to maintain spiritual practices that assume the stability of place and the reliability of gravitational orientation. The sacred spaces, churches, temples, meditation halls, that once provided fixed points for spiritual practice, now drift through space. Like all other human artifacts, their orientation constantly changing as they tumble through the void. Yet perhaps this weightless existence opens possibilities for spiritual experience that were never available in a gravity-bound world. The feeling of floating, of existing without the constant pull toward Earth, might offer new metaphors for transcendence and new direct experiences of liberation from physical constraint. Meditation practices that once aimed to transcend the body's weight and density might find their goals literally fulfilled in a world where weight and density no longer bind consciousness to fixed positions. Artists and creators face the challenge of developing new aesthetic categories for a world without gravitational reference. The concept of balance in visual art assumed the existence of gravity to define what balanced arrangements looked like. The flow of music and poetry drew on metaphors of rising and falling, of crescendo and diminuendo that related to experiences of gravitational movement. Dance, perhaps the art form most directly dependent on gravity, must be completely reconceptualized as movement through three-dimensional space, rather than resistance to gravitational pull. But from these challenges emerge possibilities for entirely new forms of artistic expression. Sculptors might create works designed to drift and rotate through space, revealing different aspects of their form as they tumble through three-dimensional exhibition spaces. Musicians might compose pieces that account for the way sound travels differently through thin, unpressurized air, creating acoustic works that could only exist in a weightless environment. Writers and poets find themselves developing new metaphorical vocabularies to describe experiences that have no precedent in gravitational existence. The floating communities that emerge among Earth's atmospheric refugees create new forms of literature and storytelling that capture the unique psychological and emotional landscapes of weightless life. As the second month of weightless existence begins, human consciousness continues its adaptation to this unprecedented reality. Children grow up learning to think in 3 dimensions rather than 2, developing spatial reasoning abilities that would have been impossible in a gravity-bound world. Adults slowly adapt their mental models of how things work, how relationships function, how meaning emerges in a universe without the organizing principle that shaped every previous human thought and experience. The question of whether consciousness itself might evolve new forms in this weightless environment remains open. If humans survive long enough in this condition, might their descendants develop forms of awareness more suited to 3-dimensional existence? Might the constant experience of floating and drifting reshape human neural development in ways that produce new capacities for thought and perception? These philosophical drifts through the implications of weightless existence reveal just how fundamentally gravity shaped not just the physical conditions of life, but consciousness, meaning, social organization, and spiritual understanding themselves. In losing gravity, humanity hasn't just lost a physical force. It has lost the organizing principle around which all human understanding was constructed. Yet in that loss, new possibilities emerge. A universe without gravitational anchors might allow for forms of consciousness, community, and meaning that were never possible when everything was bound by the constant pull toward Earth. As human survivors continue their drift through the cosmos, they carry with them not just the biological heritage of gravitational evolution, but the remarkable human capacity to create meaning and beauty from whatever conditions existence provides. The philosophical implications of gravity's absence continue to unfold as slowly and inevitably as the physical changes that reshape the material world. In contemplating these questions, the floating remnants of human civilization engage in perhaps the most profound philosophical experiment in history. Learning to be human in a universe that no longer remembers the force that made humanity possible. As the third month of weightless existence unfolds, something remarkable begins to emerge from the chaos and catastrophe of gravity's absence. Adaptation. Not just the biological adaptation that life has always demonstrated in the face of environmental challenge, but something deeper and more distinctly human. The capacity to imagine new ways of being, to engineer solutions to impossible problems, and to find beauty and meaning even in the most alien circumstances. The scattered communities of human survivors, floating through the thinning remnants of Earth's atmosphere, have begun to do what humans have always done when faced with environments that seem hostile to life. They've started building homes. These aren't the fixed, foundation-anchored structures that defined human architecture for millennia, but something entirely new, floating habitats designed for a universe without up or down. Some are cobbled together from the debris of buildings that came apart when gravity disappeared. Their materials repurposed into spherical or cylindrical structures that can maintain internal atmosphere and provide living space for small communities of survivors. The engineering challenges are unlike anything humans have ever faced. How do you create artificial gravity when gravity itself no longer exists? The solution, arrived at independently by various groups of survivors, draws on principles that were once confined to science fiction and space exploration: rotation. By constructing cylindrical habitats that spin around their central axis, communities can create the sensation of weight through centrifugal force. The outer rim of such a habitat becomes down, and inhabitants can walk on the inner surface as if it were the floor of a building. But building rotating habitats from floating debris requires engineering ingenuity that would have challenged humanity's best minds, even under ideal conditions. These structures must be perfectly balanced to avoid wobbling as they spin. Their internal systems must be designed to work with artificial gravity rather than natural gravity, and they must be constructed using materials that were never intended for this purpose. Imagine watching one of these habitats take shape as teams of survivors work together in the three-dimensional construction site that Earth's atmosphere has become. Workers float around the growing structure, pushing and pulling building materials into position, their movements coordinated through hand signals and radio communication. There's something almost ballet-like about the way they move, graceful, three-dimensional choreography as they guide beams and panels into place. The aesthetic of these floating communities develops its own distinctive character. Since there's no reason for structures to be oriented in any particular direction relative to their surroundings, architects are free to design buildings that would have been impossible under gravitational constraints. Spherical houses that provide equal living space in all directions. Branching, tree-like structures that extend tendrils in multiple directions to capture solar energy or provide docking points for smaller craft. Buildings that change their configuration as they rotate, revealing different aspects of their architecture as they turn. Daily life in these floating communities requires adaptations that range from the practical to the poetic. Your favorite coffee mug, for instance, would indeed need a lid, or better yet, be replaced entirely by something designed for three-dimensional living. Drinking vessels in weightless communities often resemble feeding tubes or squeeze bottles more than traditional cups. Every container must be designed to prevent its contents from floating away when opened. Cooking becomes an exercise in three-dimensional fluid dynamics. Water for boiling forms, perfect spheres that must be contained within specially designed cooking vessels. Seasoning floats freely through the air unless carefully managed. The simple act of eating a meal requires utensils and techniques that would seem bizarre to anyone who remembers gravity-bound dining. Yet the survivors who master these techniques often discover that food tastes different when it's not weighed down by gravity flavors, mingle more freely, and the experience of eating becomes more sensual and three-dimensional. Sleep, that most basic of human needs, must be completely reconceptualized in a weightless world. Beds as we knew them become irrelevant when there's no gravitational force to keep sleepers pressed against a mattress. Instead, sleeping arrangements might involve soft enclosures that gently hold the body in place, or elastic restraints that provide the comforting sensation of being held without requiring weight to maintain contact. Some floating communities develop communal sleeping areas, where inhabitants cluster together like schools of fish, finding comfort in proximity, even when weight can no longer provide the reassuring pressure of being physically grounded. Personal hygiene presents challenges that require creative engineering solutions. Water for washing forms, spherical droplets that must be contained and directed. leading to the development of shower systems that look more like spacesuits than bathroom fixtures. Hair, no longer held down by gravity, requires new approaches to styling and maintenance. Many survivors simply let their hair grow into the floating halos that have become characteristic of weightless existence. But perhaps most remarkably, these practical adaptations begin to reshape human social interaction in profound ways. When everyone floats at the same level, traditional concepts of social hierarchy based on physical position lose their relevance. Conversations take place in 3 dimensions, with participants arranged in spherical rather than linear configurations. The dynamics of personal space change when approach can come from any direction, not just from the horizontal plane that defined social interaction in a gravity-bound world. Children, born into these floating communities, and yes, human reproduction continues even in weightlessness, though with its own unique challenges and adaptations, grow up with spatial reasoning abilities that would have been impossible for gravity-bound humans to develop. They think naturally in 3 dimensions, navigate complex floating environments with ease, and develop play behaviors that take full advantage of weightless freedom. Their games involve complex 3-dimensional tag, elaborate floating fort construction, and forms of artistic expression that require the ability to move freely through space. These weightless children represent perhaps the most hopeful aspect of humanity's adaptation to gravity's absence. They don't mourn the loss of the ground beneath their feet because they never knew ground to lose. For them, floating is normal, 3-dimensional movement is natural, and the vast spaces between floating habitats are playgrounds rather than voids to be feared. Education in these communities necessarily takes on new forms. Traditional classroom arrangements based on students sitting in fixed positions while a teacher stands in front become impossible when positions are constantly shifting in 3 dimensions. Instead, learning becomes more interactive and spatial, with lessons that take place throughout the volume of educational spaces rather than on flat surfaces. Mathematics education, in particular, benefits from the ability to demonstrate geometric principles in actual 3-dimensional space rather than on 2-dimensional surfaces. The social structures that emerge in floating communities tend to be more egalitarian than their gravity-bound predecessors, partly by necessity and partly by the natural evolution of human organization. When traditional hierarchical metaphors lose their physical foundation, leadership in these communities often flows more dynamically, with different individuals taking charge based on expertise and situation rather than fixed positions in formal hierarchies. Trade and commerce between floating communities create a new kind of economy, based on the exchange of resources and knowledge adapted to weightless existence. Communities that successfully develop air recycling systems trade their expertise with groups that have mastered food production in zero gravity. The currency of this new economy is often knowledge itself, techniques for construction, solutions to engineering problems, cultural innovations that make life more pleasant or meaningful in weightless conditions. Some communities specialize in particular aspects of weightless living. One group might become experts in growing food in 3-dimensional hydroponic systems, their habitat resembling a floating garden where plants grow in all directions from central nutrient sources. Another might focus on manufacturing, developing techniques for metalworking and fabrication that function in weightless conditions. Still others might emphasize culture and art, becoming centers of learning and creativity that preserve and develop human cultural heritage in its new weightless form. Communication between these scattered communities creates networks that span the 3-dimensional space of Earth's expanding atmospheric debris field. Radio signals carry news, technical information, cultural exchanges, and personal messages between habitats that may be separated by hundreds of kilometers of space. These communication networks become the nervous system of a new kind of human civilization, distributed, 3-dimensional, and adapted to existence without the gravitational bonds that once held human communities close to planetary surfaces. The psychological impact of this distributed existence proves to be less traumatic than might have been expected. Humans, it turns out, are remarkably adaptable to new spatial arrangements when the change provides opportunities for creativity and community building. The freedom of 3-dimensional movement, once the initial disorientation passes, offers liberation from constraints that many people didn't realize they were living under. The ability to float, to move in any direction, to experience space without the constant tug of gravity, provides a sense of physical freedom that some inhabitants of floating communities describe as transcendent. Artists in these communities develop entirely new forms of expression that take advantage of weightless conditions. Sculptors create works designed to rotate slowly in space, revealing different aspects as they turn. Dancers perform in 3 dimensions, their movements freed from the need to resist gravitational pull. Musicians discover that sound travels differently through the thin, unpressurized air of the debris field, leading to new approaches to acoustic composition that account for the altered physics of sound transmission. Writers and poets develop new vocabularies to describe experiences that have no precedent in human literature. They create works that capture the psychological landscape of weightless existence, the mixture of liberation and loss, the adaptation to new forms of beauty, the strange comfort that comes from learning to be at home in the void between what was once ground and sky. As these communities mature and develop, some begin to make deliberate migrations through the space around Earth's trajectory, following orbital mechanics that would have been impossible when gravity held everything in fixed relationships. These migrating communities become like fleets of glowing lanterns, drifting between regions of the atmospheric debris field, their lights visible from great distances as they carry human culture and consciousness on journeys that may span continents or even oceans. The sight of such a migration, hundreds of small lights moving in formation through the darkness, each one representing a community of survivors who have learned to make homes in the void, becomes one of the most beautiful and poignant images of humanity's adaptation to its new circumstances. These aren't refugees fleeing from disaster, but pioneers choosing their own paths through a 3-dimensional frontier that offers unlimited possibilities for exploration and settlement. Some communities decide to follow trajectories that will carry them away from Earth entirely, choosing to become true space nomads who will spend generations traveling through the solar system and perhaps eventually toward other stars. Others remain closer to Earth's path, developing technologies and social structures that allow them to thrive in the debris field that was once the planet's atmosphere. The children growing up in these migrating communities represent something entirely new in human evolution, not just physical adaptation to weightless conditions, but psychological and cultural adaptation to existence as a spacefaring species. They dream not of returning to the solid ground their parents remember, but of the vast territories of space that stretch in all directions around their floating homes. These human migrations through space become stories of hope and wonder that spread through the communication networks connecting scattered communities. Tales of successful journeys to new regions of the debris field, discoveries of particularly rich areas for resource extraction or especially beautiful views of Earth and Sun, innovations in spacecraft design and community organization. All of these stories contribute to a growing body of human knowledge about how to live and thrive as a species adapted to existence in space rather than on planetary surfaces. The floating communities that emerge from gravity's absence prove that humanity's greatest strength has always been its adaptability, the capacity to imagine new ways of being human and then build the technologies and social structures necessary to make those imaginings real. In learning to live as eternal drifters through the cosmos, humanity discovers not loss but liberation, not limitation but unprecedented freedom to become something larger and more wonderful than anything that was ever possible when consciousness was bound to the surface of a single world. As Earth continues its journey away from the Sun, carrying with it this growing constellation of human communities adapted to weightless existence, the species that once defined itself by its connection to solid ground begins its transformation into something new. A civilization of the void, at home among the stars, finding beauty and meaning in the vast spaces between worlds that were once thought empty but are now revealed to be full of infinite possibility for those who learn to call the cosmos home. And so we return to where we began, floating gently in the darkness, between what was once up and down, contemplating the simple question that started this impossible journey. What would happen if gravity turned off? We've drifted together through scenarios both beautiful and terrible, watching oceans rise into the sky and planets scatter like pearls from a broken necklace, witnessing humanity's remarkable capacity to adapt and create meaning, even in the most alien circumstances imaginable. The answer, as we've discovered, is far more profound than any single description could capture. If gravity turned off, we would lose more than just the force that keeps our feet on the ground. We would lose the organizing principle around which all existence as we know it has been constructed. We would lose the invisible hand that shapes galaxies and guides raindrops, that builds planets and orchestrates the dance of celestial bodies, that makes breathing possible and gives meaning to the simple act of standing up. But in exploring this impossible scenario, we've also discovered something wonderful about the nature of the force we so rarely think about. Gravity, it turns out, is not just a physical phenomenon described by equations and measured by instruments. It's the foundation of everything we understand about being alive, being conscious, being human in a universe that somehow conspired to make our existence possible. Think about what we've witnessed in our imagination. We've seen oceans transformed from vast blue expanses stretched across planetary surfaces into floating spheres of water drifting through space like enormous jewels, each one carrying its cargo of marine life on journeys no evolutionary process could have prepared them for. Whales swimming in spherical seas, dolphins spiraling through water that has no surface, coral reefs growing in three-dimensional sculptures. Impossible in any gravity-bound ocean, these images capture something essential about how deeply gravity has shaped not just the physical structure of our world, but our very conception of what's possible. We've watched as the atmosphere itself, that thin blue envelope that has protected and sustained life for billions of years, slowly dissipated into space without gravity's gentle pressure to hold it close to Earth. We've seen how the simple act of breathing, so automatic we rarely think about it, depends entirely on gravity's ability to create and maintain the atmospheric conditions that allow oxygen to reach our lungs and sustain the complex chemistry of life. The transformation of time itself reveals perhaps the most subtle and profound aspect of gravity's influence on existence. When we imagined gravity disappearing, we discovered that time would flow slightly faster, liberated from the gravitational time dilation that Einstein showed us, connects mass, energy, space, and time in an intricate dance of cosmic geometry. The very passage of moments, the rhythm by which we measure our lives, has been shaped by gravity's presence in ways so fundamental we never noticed them. We've contemplated how human consciousness itself, our thoughts, emotions, language, and understanding developed within a gravitational context that provided the metaphorical framework for everything from love to meaning to social organization. The realization that we fall in love, that we feel grounded when secure, that ideas have weight and problems feel heavy, reveals how completely gravity has shaped not just our physical existence, but our psychological and spiritual understanding of what it means to be human. Perhaps most remarkably, we've seen how human creativity and adaptability could transform even the catastrophic loss of gravity into opportunities for new forms of beauty, community, and meaning. The floating communities we imagined, with their rotating habitats and three-dimensional architectures, their new forms of art and social organization, their children, who grow up thinking naturally in 3 dimensions. These possibilities remind us that humanity's greatest strength has always been its capacity to create homes and meaning from whatever conditions the universe provides. The migrations of human communities through space, like fleets of glowing lanterns carrying civilization between the scattered debris of a world that once knew solid ground, offer a vision of hope and wonder that transcends the apparent catastrophe of gravity's absence. In learning to live without the force that made us possible, humanity might discover new ways of being human that we could never have imagined while bound to the surface of a single world. But as we drift back toward waking consciousness, as this thought experiment draws to its gentle close, what emerges most clearly is not fascination with gravity's absence, but profound gratitude for its presence. In imagining a universe without gravity, we discover how much we have to appreciate about the invisible force that shapes every moment of our existence. Gravity keeps our feet on the ground, providing the stable foundation that allows us to walk, run, dance, and simply stand still without thinking about the miraculous engineering that makes such simple acts possible. It holds our atmosphere close, ensuring that every breath brings life-sustaining oxygen to our lungs without requiring conscious effort or technological intervention. It draws water from clouds as rain, allowing rivers to flow towards seas and providing the hydrological cycle that distributes fresh water across the continents where terrestrial life can flourish. Gravity orchestrates the tides, those vast rhythmic breathings of the ocean that respond to the gravitational dance between Earth, Moon, and Sun. Twice each day, the sea reaches toward our satellite and falls back again, a pulse as regular and reliable as a planetary heartbeat. This tidal rhythm shapes the lives of countless species, creates the coastal environments where life first ventured from sea to land, and provides one of the most visible reminders of gravity's presence in our daily experience. Our moon itself, that faithful companion that has accompanied Earth for more than 4 billion years, remains in its gentle orbit around our planet only because gravity provides the invisible tether that connects these two worlds across the vacuum of space. The moon's influence on Earth, stabilizing our planet's axial tilt, moderating our climate, inspiring countless generations of human poetry and romance, exists only because gravity creates the cosmic partnership between these two celestial bodies. On a larger scale, gravity maintains Earth's orbit around the Sun, keeping our planet at precisely the right distance to maintain the temperature range that allows liquid water to exist on our surface. Too close, and the oceans would boil away into space. Too far, and they would freeze into ice that might never melt. The Goldilocks zone, where Earth resides, not too hot and not too cold, but just right for life, exists only because gravity provides the orbital mechanics that maintain our planet's position in this narrow band of habitability. The Sun itself shines only because gravity compresses hydrogen into the extreme densities and temperatures necessary for nuclear fusion. Without gravitational collapse to create the conditions for fusion reactions, stars would never ignite, and the universe would remain a cold, dark void without the energy sources that make chemistry, life, and consciousness possible. Every photon of sunlight that warms our world, every calorie of energy that powers the biological processes of life, originates from gravity's ability to squeeze matter into the stellar furnaces that illuminate the cosmos. On the largest scales, gravity provides the architecture of the universe itself. It gathers matter into stars and planets, organizes stars into galaxies, and arranges galaxies into the vast cosmic web of structure that defines the universe's large-scale geography. Without gravity, matter would remain forever dispersed, as a thin, uniform gas expanding through space, never condensing into the complex structures that allow for planets, chemistry, and life. But perhaps the most beautiful thing about gravity is how quietly and humbly it performs all these cosmic duties. Unlike the dramatic forces of nature, lightning, hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, gravity works with such gentle persistence that we rarely notice its presence. It never announces itself with thunder or spectacle. It simply pulls, constantly and quietly, shaping the universe with patient determination that spans billions of years. Gravity never asks to be noticed, never demands recognition for its role in making existence possible. It works behind the scenes, like the perfect stagehand who ensures that every element of a theatrical performance is in its proper place, without ever appearing on stage to take credit for the production's success. The audience sees the drama, the comedy, the romance, the tragedy, all the visible elements of the performance, while remaining unaware of the invisible hand that makes the entire production possible. In our daily lives, we experience gravity's gifts without conscious gratitude. We wake each morning confident that our feet will find the floor, that water will flow from faucets downward into sinks, that objects will remain where we place them instead of floating away. We plan our days around assumptions of gravitational stability so fundamental that we never question them. We build our homes, our cities, our entire civilization on the assumption that gravity will continue to provide the reliable foundation that makes complex social organization possible. Yet gravity asks nothing in return for these services. It doesn't require worship or recognition, payment or gratitude. It simply continues its ancient work of holding the universe together, organizing matter into the complex structures that allow for planets and chemistry and life and consciousness, and all the wonders that emerge when simple physical forces operate with consistency across cosmic timescales. This humility, this quiet persistence, might be gravity's most remarkable quality. In a universe full of dramatic forces and spectacular phenomena, gravity achieves the most profound effects through the gentlest means. It never overwhelms or destroys, it simply organizes, guides, and maintains the conditions that allow more dramatic phenomena to occur within frameworks of stability and predictability. When we consider the alternative, the weightless chaos we've imagined together, the dissolution of oceans and atmospheres and planetary systems, at the end of breathing and walking and all the simple acts that define terrestrial existence, we begin to appreciate the miracle of gravity's quiet presence. Every mundane moment of our lives depends on forces and processes so far beyond our control or understanding that they might as well be magic, yet they operate with such reliability that we take them entirely for granted. The coffee that stays in your cup, the air that fills your lungs, the ground that supports your weight, the moon that rises each evening in the sky. All of these everyday miracles exist only because gravity provides the invisible infrastructure that makes ordinary life possible. Without this foundation, there would be no homes to return to, no familiar places to provide comfort and security, no stable reference points around which to organize human meaning and memory. In contemplating gravity's absence, we discover something profound about presence itself. how the most essential things in our lives are often the least visible, how the forces that sustain us work so quietly and efficiently that we forget they exist at all. Like the air we breathe, like the beating of our hearts, like the passage of time itself, gravity operates below the threshold of conscious awareness, while making conscious awareness possible. This realization invites a kind of cosmic humility, a recognition that our existence depends on forces and processes that dwarf human understanding and control. We are not the masters of the universe we sometimes imagine ourselves to be, but beneficiaries of cosmic conditions that arose through processes far more ancient and vast than human civilization. Gravity reminds us that we are part of something larger than ourselves, participants in cosmic systems that operated for billions of years before human consciousness emerged, and will continue for billions of years after our species has returned to the stardust from which it came. Yet this humility need not diminish human significance or wonder. Instead, it can deepen our appreciation for the remarkable fact that the universe somehow organized itself in ways that allow for consciousness, creativity, love, and meaning to emerge from the dance of fundamental forces. That gravity's patient work of organizing matter could eventually lead to beings capable of contemplating gravity itself suggests something profound about the nature of cosmos, that complexity and beauty and awareness are not accidents, but natural expressions of physical processes operating across vast scales of space and time. In our floating journey through the consequences of gravity's absence, we've explored not just physics but poetry, not just mechanics but meaning. We've discovered that to understand any fundamental force of nature is to understand something essential about what it means to exist in a universe where such forces operate. Gravity is not just an equation or a measurement, it's the foundation of home, the enabler of breath, the organizer of love and loss, and all the experiences that make human life meaningful. As we prepare to return from this weightless thought experiment to the gravitational reality where our feet know which way is down and our hearts know how to pump blood against the gentle but constant pull toward Earth's center, we carry with us a new appreciation for the invisible force that makes such return possible. In imagining a universe without gravity, we discover the profound gift of living in a universe where gravity provides the stable foundation for everything we know and love. The wonder we feel in contemplating the cosmos, the awe that comes from looking up at stars and realizing our connection to processes larger than ourselves, deepens when we understand how gravity connects us to those distant lights. The same force that keeps our feet on the ground also holds planets in their orbits around other stars, maintains the nuclear fusion that makes those stars shine, and organizes matter into the galactic structures that provide the cosmic neighborhoods where stellar systems like our own can form and flourish. We are not separate from the cosmos, but woven into its fabric by gravitational threads that connect us to everything else in the universe. The force that holds us to Earth also binds Earth to its moon, the Earth-Moon system to the Sun, our solar system to the Milky Way galaxy, and our galaxy to the vast network of gravitational relationships that structure the observable universe. In feeling gravity's gentle pull, we participate in cosmic processes that span billions of light years and billions of years. This cosmic perspective transforms gravity from a simple physical force into something approaching the sacred, not because it requires supernatural explanation, but because its natural operation creates conditions so beautiful and complex that they inspire the kind of reverence once reserved for explicitly religious experiences. To be held by gravity is to be held by the universe itself, embraced by forces that connect us to every star we see in the night sky. Perhaps this is why the loss of gravity, even in imagination, feels like such a profound catastrophe. We would lose not just physical stability but existential grounding, not just the ability to walk but the foundation of meaning itself. Without gravity to provide the organizing principle around which life and consciousness develop, we would lose the cosmic context that makes human existence feel like a meaningful part of a larger story, rather than an isolated accident in an indifferent void. But we need not lose gravity to experience gratitude for its presence. Every moment offers opportunities to appreciate the quiet miracle of forces that work too well to be noticed. The next time you take a step, feel the reliable solidity of ground beneath your feet. The next time you pour water into a glass, watch the elegant way liquid follows gravitational guidance to settle into the container's shape. The next time you look up at the moon, remember that you're seeing the visible sign of invisible forces that connect Earth to its cosmic companion across nearly 240 miles of empty space. These everyday encounters with gravity's effects can become moments of wonder, if we approach them with the appreciation that comes from understanding how remarkable it is that such phenomena exist at all. The universe could have been a place where matter remained forever dispersed, where no stars formed to create the elements necessary for planets and life, where no forces existed to organize simple ingredients into the complex structures that allow for consciousness and meaning. Instead, we live in a universe where gravity provides the patient, persistent organizing force that transforms cosmic simplicity into terrestrial complexity, stellar hydrogen into planetary chemistry, and planetary chemistry into the biological processes that somehow give rise to beings capable of wonder, love, and the creation of meaning from their encounters with the cosmos that created them. In this light, even the most ordinary moments of our gravity-bound existence reveal themselves as extraordinary. Walking becomes a dance with cosmic forces. Breathing becomes participation in atmospheric processes, maintained by planetary-scale gravitational systems. Looking up at the night sky becomes recognition of our place in gravitational networks that span the visible universe. And sleep, that daily return to unconsciousness, that mirrors our return from this weightless thought experiment to ordinary awareness, becomes a form of trust in the forces that will continue their ancient work, while consciousness rests. We close our eyes, confident that gravity will keep the air around us, the ground beneath us, the moon in its orbit, and the sun in its appointed place in our sky. We sleep held by forces larger than our understanding, but reliable enough to provide the foundation for dreams. So sleep well, knowing that you are held by the universe itself, embraced by forces that connect you to every star and planet, supported by the same cosmic architecture that builds galaxies and guides the formation of worlds. Rest in the knowledge that the gentle pull you feel toward the earth beneath you is your participation in the fundamental force that makes existence possible, that organizes chaos into beauty, that transforms the simple ingredients of space and time into the complex recipe for consciousness and love. May your dreams be grounded in wonder at the remarkable fact that in a universe of infinite possibility, conditions arose that allow beings like yourself to contemplate the forces that sustain them. And may you wake with new appreciation for the invisible pull that keeps your feet on the ground, your air around you, your moon in the sky, and your heart beating in rhythm with the cosmic forces that make every moment of existence an unlikely and extraordinary gift. Perhaps the most beautiful thing about gravity is that it never asks to be noticed, never demands recognition for its role in making everything possible. Yet without it, there would be no home to dream in, no ground to stand on, no air to breathe, no stable foundation for the endless human project of creating meaning and beauty from whatever conditions the universe provides. Sleep well, and may your dreams always be grounded in wonder. In the quiet aftermath of our weightless journey, as consciousness settles back into the familiar embrace of gravity's gentle pull, something profound has shifted in our awareness. Having spent these hours floating through the impossible landscape of a universe without its most fundamental organizing force, we return to our gravity-bound existence with new eyes, as if seeing the world clearly for the first time after a long period of unconscious blindness. The experience lingers, like the memory of a vivid dream that changes how we perceive waking reality. Every mundane interaction with the gravitational world carries with it the echo of weightless possibility, the ghost of what might be if the invisible hand that shapes our existence were to release its hold. This lingering awareness transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for wonder, routine experiences into encounters with the miraculous physics that makes ordinary experience possible. Consider what happens when you place a book on a table after our imaginative journey through weightlessness. In the past, this action would have been so automatic as to be unconscious, a simple matter of releasing an object and watching gravity guide it to rest on a horizontal surface. But now, having imagined that same book floating freely through space, tumbling in slow rotation as it drifts away from any fixed reference point, the simple act of placement becomes charged with new meaning. You feel the book's weight in your hand, that subtle but constant pressure that speaks to its mass and gravity's unwavering insistence on drawing all matter toward Earth's center. You notice how the book settles onto the table's surface, with a small sound, not dramatic, just the gentle contact between two solid objects. Brought together by forces so reliable, we build our entire civilization around their consistency. The book stays where you put it, held in place by friction and gravity's downward pull, available for reading, because gravitational forces maintain the stable spatial relationships that allow for concepts like here and there to have meaning. This enhanced awareness extends to every aspect of embodied existence. Walking becomes a conscious collaboration with gravitational forces rather than an unconscious motor pattern. Each step involves a complex dance of balance and momentum, your body using gravity's downward pull as a reliable reference point for maintaining equilibrium while moving through space. Your inner ear, that delicate instrument of spatial orientation, constantly calculates your position relative to gravity's vertical axis, providing the neurological foundation for your sense of which way is up. The simple act of standing still reveals itself as an ongoing negotiation with physics. Your bones and muscles work continuously to maintain an upright posture against gravity's gentle but persistent pull toward the ground. Blood flows through your circulatory system according to pressure gradients partly determined by gravitational effects. Your lungs expand and contract in rhythm with breathing patterns that depend on atmospheric pressure, maintained by gravity's ability to hold air close to Earth's surface. Even sitting quietly, as you might be doing now while absorbing these words, involves constant unconscious adjustments to gravitational forces. Your spine maintains its curve against the downward pull on your torso. Your head remains balanced atop your neck through muscular corrections so subtle and automatic that you never notice them until illness or injury disrupts these patterns. The chair or surface supporting you distributes your weight according to principles of structural engineering that assume gravity's reliable presence. This new awareness of gravity's pervasive influence extends beyond personal embodiment to encompass the entire sensory world that surrounds us. The play of light and shadow that creates the visual texture of everyday experience depends on objects maintaining consistent spatial relationships rather than drifting randomly through three-dimensional space. The aesthetic appeal of landscapes, architectural forms, and natural scenes emerges partly from compositional elements that assume gravitational orientation: trees that grow upward toward light, waterfalls that flow downward following gravity's guidance, buildings that rise from solid foundations rather than floating freely through air. Sounds, too, carry with them the acoustic signature of a gravitational world. The footsteps that mark human passage across solid surfaces, the rustle of leaves falling from trees, the splash of water flowing into containers, all of these familiar audio textures depend on gravity's ability to create predictable interactions between objects and surfaces. In our imagined weightless world, these sounds would be replaced by the whispered acoustics of objects drifting through thin air, the soft collisions of floating debris, the muffled conversations of people learning to speak in three-dimensional space rather than across horizontal planes. The enhanced awareness that follows from our weightless thought experiment also transforms how we understand human relationships and social interactions. Having imagined communities of floating survivors, learning to organize themselves without the gravitational metaphors that structure traditional social hierarchies, we return to gravity-bound society with new appreciation for how physical forces shape cultural forms. The simple act of sitting together for conversation reveals its dependence on gravitational stability. Chairs arranged around a table, people positioned at consistent heights relative to each other, the shared reference point of ground level that allows for eye contact and spatial intimacy. All of these social arrangements depend on gravity's ability to provide stable spatial relationships. In weightless communities, conversation might involve participants floating at different orientations, their heads pointing in various directions as they navigate three-dimensional social space, according to entirely different protocols of proximity and attention. Physical gestures that communicate meaning in gravity-bound interaction, pointing to indicate direction, nodding to suggest agreement, shrugging to express uncertainty, carry with them assumptions about spatial orientation that would require complete translation in weightless environments. The embodied language through which humans communicate emotional states and social intentions evolved within gravitational constraints that provided consistent reference points for up and down, forward and back, approaching and retreating. Even the architecture of human settlements takes on new significance when viewed through the lens of gravitational awareness. Buildings that seemed merely functional before our weightless journey now reveal themselves as engineering marvels specifically adapted to gravitational conditions. Foundations that anchor structures to solid ground, walls that rise vertically to support roofs overhead, the stairs that allow movement between different elevation levels. Every element of human architecture represents a sophisticated response to the challenges and opportunities that gravity creates. Cities themselves become visible as vast collaborations with gravitational forces. Streets follow contours that account for water drainage patterns determined by gravity's pull. Sewage systems rely on gravitational flow to transport waste away from human habitation. Public transportation moves people efficiently through urban space, partly because gravity provides predictable spatial relationships between origin and destination points. The enhanced gravitational awareness that emerges from our thought experiment also deepens appreciation for natural phenomena that previously seemed ordinary. Weather patterns that bring clouds overhead and rain downward reveal themselves as expressions of atmospheric physics, made possible by gravity's ability to maintain air pressure and create circulation patterns. Rivers that flow from mountains towards seas follow courses determined by gravitational pull working in conjunction with topographical features. Seasonal changes that mark the passage of time through shifting patterns of temperature, daylight, and plant growth depend on Earth's stable orbit around the Sun. An orbital relationship maintained by gravitational forces, operating across nearly 93 million miles of space. The reliability of seasonal cycles, so fundamental to agricultural planning and cultural traditions, exists only because gravity provides the cosmic mechanics that keep Earth at appropriate distance from its stellar energy source. Plant life takes on new meaning when viewed through gravitational awareness. Trees that seemed merely decorative before our weightless journey now appear as remarkable living sculptures shaped by their ongoing response to gravitational forces. Roots that anchor trees to soil and draw nutrients upward, trunks that grow straight and strong against gravity's downward pull, branches that spread outward to capture sunlight while maintaining structural integrity. Every aspect of plant architecture represents evolutionary adaptation to gravitational conditions. The falling of leaves in autumn becomes more than seasonal decoration. It reveals the constant negotiation between living systems and gravitational forces. Each leaf that drifts downward through air follows a trajectory determined by its weight, surface area, and the fluid dynamics of movement through atmosphere held in place by gravity. The carpets of fallen leaves that accumulate on forest floors represent gravity's role in cycling nutrients through ecological systems, returning aerial photosynthesis products to soil where they can support future plant growth. Even the flight of birds gains new dimensions of meaning when understood as evolutionary adaptation to gravitational conditions. Wing shapes, bone density, muscle configurations, respiratory efficiency, every aspect of avian anatomy represents solutions to the challenges of powered flight in gravitational fields. The murmurations of starlings, the soaring of hawks, the precision formation, flying of geese. All these aerial performances depend on birds' mastery of gravitational physics, combined with fluid dynamics and biological energy systems. Water, that most essential component of life, reveals new layers of significance when viewed through gravitational awareness. The water cycle that distributes moisture across Earth's surface operates according to gravitational principles that draw precipitation downward from clouds, guide surface water into streams and rivers, and maintain the pressure differentials that drive circulation through atmospheric and oceanic systems. The simple pleasure of drinking water becomes charged with new meaning when we remember our imagined weightless world, where liquids formed spherical droplets that floated freely through space. The way water flows from faucets, settles in containers, and moves predictably through human-built distribution systems. All of this depends on gravity's reliable downward pull, providing consistent direction for fluid movement. Ocean waves, those endlessly fascinating patterns of water motion that have inspired human contemplation for millennia, exist only because gravity provides the restoring force that creates oscillatory motion in water disturbed by wind or seismic activity. The rhythmic arrival of waves on beaches, the sound of surf that many find deeply relaxing, the tidal pools that create unique ecological niches. All of these coastal phenomena depend on gravitational interactions between Earth, Moon, and Sun, operating across astronomical distances. The enhanced awareness that follows from imaginative encounters with weightlessness also transforms how we understand human creativity and cultural expression. Art forms that seemed purely aesthetic before our gravitational awakening reveal themselves as responses to the spatial conditions that gravity creates. Painting and sculpture work with compositional principles that assume stable spatial relationships between objects and surfaces. Architecture balances functional requirements with aesthetic aspirations that depend on gravity's ability to create meaningful distinctions between foundation and elevation, weight and lightness, stability and movement. Music, too, carries within its structure metaphorical relationships to gravitational experience. The concepts of high and low notes, of melodic lines that rise and fall, of rhythmic patterns that create sense of lift or weight. All of these musical elements draw on embodied understanding of gravitational forces. the physical sensation of bass frequencies that seem to resonate in the body's lower regions, the emotional associations between ascending melodies and feelings of joy or hope. These aesthetic experiences depend on neurological connections between auditory processing and gravitational awareness. Dance, perhaps the art form most directly dependent on gravitational conditions, takes on new significance when viewed as creative collaboration with fundamental physical forces. Every leap challenges gravity's downward pull. Every landing negotiates with gravitational forces. Every gesture works with or against the constant vertical reference that gravity provides. The beauty of human movement in dance emerges partly from the tension between gravitational constraint and creative freedom, between physical limitation and expressive possibility. Literature and poetry gain new dimensions when understood as linguistic responses to gravitational experience. The metaphorical language that humans use to describe emotional states, social relationships, and spiritual aspirations draws heavily on gravitational imagery. We speak of feeling uplifted by positive experiences, weighed down by responsibilities, grounded by stable relationships, elevated by inspiring encounters. These linguistic patterns reveal how deeply gravitational experience has shaped human consciousness and communication. Even abstract concepts like justice, morality, and truth carry gravitational metaphors that suggest how physical forces shape ethical thinking. We speak of moral weight, of grave responsibilities, of levity as the opposite of seriousness. Legal systems metaphorically weigh evidence and arguments. Philosophical traditions describe truth as having substance that gives it authority over lighter, less substantial claims. The enhanced gravitational awareness that emerges from our thought experiment creates opportunities for what might be called gravitational mindfulness, a practice of conscious attention to the ways that fundamental physical forces shape moment-to-moment experience. This awareness might involve noticing the sensation of weight in your body as you sit or stand, feeling the pressure of objects against surfaces, observing the predictable behavior of falling or flowing materials. Such mindfulness need not become obsessive or interfere with ordinary activity. Instead, it can provide a background awareness that enriches daily experience with appreciation for the remarkable physics that makes ordinary life possible. Like other forms of mindfulness practice, gravitational awareness can create moments of wonder and gratitude that transform routine experiences into encounters with the extraordinary. The practice might involve simple exercises, taking a moment to feel your weight against whatever surface supports you, noticing the way objects settle when you place them down, observing the behavior of liquids as they pour or flow, watching the falling of leaves or rain with attention to the gravitational forces that guide their motion. These small moments of attention can accumulate into a deeper appreciation for the cosmic forces that sustain terrestrial existence. As our imaginative journey through weightlessness comes to its end, we carry with us not just intellectual understanding of gravity's importance, but embodied awareness of our constant participation in gravitational systems that connect us to Earth, Moon, Sun, and the vast cosmic web of matter and energy that structures the universe. We return to ordinary consciousness, transformed by our encounter with the extraordinary, enriched by our exploration of impossible conditions, grateful for the reliable presence of forces we had previously taken for granted. This transformation suggests something profound about the nature of wonder and its relationship to understanding. By imagining conditions so different from ordinary experience that they seem impossible, we can develop new appreciation for the conditions that actually exist. The thought experiment of weightlessness serves not to prepare us for a world without gravity, but to awaken us to the miracle of living in a world where gravity provides the foundation for everything we know and love. In this way, imagination becomes a tool for gratitude, speculation becomes a path to appreciation, and scientific understanding becomes a source of wonder rather than explanation that reduces mystery to mechanism. The more we understand about how gravity works, the more remarkable it becomes that such forces exist at all, that they operate with such consistency and reliability, that they create conditions suitable for the emergence of consciousness, capable of contemplating its own cosmic context. The weight of memory that remains from our weightless journey is not heavy but buoyant. It lifts ordinary experience toward appreciation, transforms routine encounters with gravitational forces into opportunities for wonder, and provides a foundation for ongoing amazement at the remarkable fact that we exist in a universe organized by forces beautiful enough to sustain not only physical complexity, but conscious beings capable of discovering beauty in the laws that govern their existence. As we settle back into our gravity-bound lives, we carry with us the weightless memory of possibility, the floating echo of what might be, and the grounded appreciation for what actually is this remarkable world, where feet know their proper relationship to Earth, where breath comes easily through atmosphere held close by invisible forces, where the simple act of being conscious occurs within cosmic conditions so precisely calibrated that consciousness itself becomes possible. The weight of this memory, paradoxically light and heavy at once, settles into our awareness like gravity itself, quietly, persistently, shaping everything that follows without calling attention to its presence, providing the invisible foundation upon which all subsequent experience can build meaning, beauty, and the endless human capacity for wonder at the fact of existence itself. As we drift toward the edge of sleep, carried by the gentle rhythm of breath and heartbeat that gravity helps regulate, the weightless journey we've shared begins its own transformation from conscious thought experiment into the deeper realm, where imagination mingles with memory, where impossible scenarios become dream logic, and where the mind continues its exploration of wonder, even as awareness fades. Tonight, perhaps, your dreams will carry echoes of floating oceans and spinning habitats, of children learning to fly through three-dimensional playgrounds, and communities of survivors creating homes among the stars. These dream fragments won't follow the careful physics we've explored together, but they'll capture something essential about the experience of imagining existence without its most fundamental anchor. In sleep, the brain's remarkable capacity for processing and integrating experience continues its work below the threshold of consciousness. The neural networks that light up when we contemplate gravity's influence on blood circulation, plant growth, and planetary motion. These same patterns may replay in modified form, as dreams weave together floating whales and rotating cities, weightless children and migrating communities of light. Dreams have their own relationship with gravity, don't they? In sleep, we often find ourselves flying without explanation, moving through space in ways that would be impossible in waking life. Perhaps these common dream experiences reflect some deep neural memory of what movement might feel like without gravitational constraint, or maybe they simply represent the brain's playful exploration of physical possibilities freed from the normal rules that govern embodied existence. The floating sensation that sometimes occurs at the boundary between waking and sleeping, that gentle feeling of weightlessness that can startle us back to consciousness, might tonight carry new meaning. Instead of an unwelcome interruption of sleep's approach, it could become a bridge between our gravitational reality and the weightless world we've imagined together, a momentary gift of actual weightlessness within the safety of horizontal rest. As consciousness dissolves into sleep, the constant background awareness of gravity's pull gradually fades. The weight of limbs against mattress, the pressure of head against pillow, the sense of being held by solid surfaces. All of these gravitational sensations that anchor us to physical reality during waking hours slowly recede as the nervous system shifts into sleep's different mode of operation. Yet even in sleep, gravity continues its patient work. It maintains the atmospheric pressure that allows for easy breathing throughout the night. It keeps blood circulating according to patterns your heart learned over millions of years of gravitational evolution. It holds your body in gentle contact with the surfaces that support rest, preventing the floating drift that would make sleep impossible in truly weightless conditions. Sleep well, knowing that gravity stands guard over your rest, maintaining the stable conditions that allow consciousness to safely disappear and return. May your dreams be filled with the wonder we've shared, floating oceans that catch starlight, communities that build homes among the clouds, and the deep appreciation for forces so reliable that we can trust them to hold the world together while we rest. And may you wake tomorrow with eyes newly open to the gravitational miracles that surround every moment, grateful for the invisible pull that keeps your dreams grounded in a universe vast enough for wonder, stable enough for love, and mysterious enough to inspire a lifetime of amazement at the simple fact of being here at all.